This may not seem very startling because anyone can balance a broom, but this is a machine that can learn to do this as well as other very complex responses. This is the story of Madeline, the machine that in some respects thinks like a man. And this is science in action. By now, we're all fairly familiar with computers such as this one, and we can now remember with some amusement the fears that many of us expressed that machines such as these might someday take over the world. Today, we recognize them for exactly what they are: huge calculators, arithmetic machines, no more capable of acting for themselves than a desktop adding machine. However, a totally new class of computing machine has recently come into being. It's called an adaptive computer, and it is important because it can learn from its own experience. Now, our guest is the man principally responsible for the development of this kind of equipment known as Adeline. He is Associate Professor of Electrical Engineering at Stanford University, and it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bernard Widrow. Bernie, how have you been?
Earl, thank you. Fine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Now, is it true that this equipment you work with is really classified as a thinking machine?
Well, we don't really understand what thinking is about, but we call these things learning machines.
So more properly then, learning machine rather than thinking machine.
Correct.
Let me ask you about the name Adeline. Why Adeline? Why not a masculine name?
Well, this happened to spell out an adaptive linear neuron, and that's it.
Adaptive linear neuron, so that then works in Adeline.
Correct.
I think at this point we're about ready to see one of the more simplified versions of this. So Bernie, if we could go over here and look at one that has a special name, and I like this because it says Knobby Adeline down here.
Full of knobs.
Let's turn it around and see what it is on the backside. Lots of equipment.
Oh, it looks like a lot, but it's simple. All it consists of actually are batteries, resistors, and a meter.
And how does it work?
Well, signals are applied by means of these switches. It is a pattern discriminator. It is able to classify pattern information. The patterns are fed to it by means of these switches. The settings of the machine, the memory, is stored mechanically in these weight values. These are variable gain elements. They're variable resistors. They're much like the volume control in a radio or a TV set. By varying these things, one can vary the kind of logic function that will be performed by this machine when it's presented with pattern information.
And the information then is recorded on this and then shows up on this meter up at the top here.
The machine has been trained to discriminate two different patterns, a T and a J, and let me demonstrate this to you. The T is inserted like so. The T was trained to give a positive response.
Yes.
The J, on the other hand, was trained to give a negative response. There's the J, and you see the negative response.
So positive or negative response, and I gather that these knobs here, then, are used to modify this information.
Exactly.
But, Bernie, I wanted to ask you one thing. I normally think of a computer as being something very fast, but if you have to turn all these knobs, this would slow down your speed.
It certainly would, and we have developed some devices at Stanford University, new electronic components that allow practical realization of these principles without having to have anyone turn the knobs manually.
Oh, you take the knobs away, then put in something else.
Put in something else. It does functionally the same thing, except that it's done electronically instead of mechanically. What we have is an electronically variable resistance element, and it works by electroplating.
And to understand that, we'll have to go over and look at this very simple arrangement here. It's nothing more or less than a test tube and some wires, but some very important wires.
To achieve a variable resistance in an electronic device, I don't know if you can see this, Earl. There it is. We use an ordinary pencil lead at this stage. This was the very first device that we call a memristor. Memristor stands for a resistor with memory. It's possible, by filling this with a plating bath, to plate copper from the support rod onto the piece of graphite. And by doing so, you can vary its resistance from approximately 8 ohms down to about 1/4 of an ohm. This is something like a 30-to-1 ratio. It's a perfectly reversible process, and it's possible to set the resistance exactly where you wish.
So then by either plating or, what's the word, deplating?
Stripping. Deplating, yes.
Then you would have in this test tube what you actually had in all those knobs on the other device.
Exactly. Here is a machine that we built using test tubes. It was possible for us to insert patterns by means of these switches and to teach this array of test tubes to discriminate some reasonably complex patterns.
And this was the first device of its kind?
It was working two weeks after we first got the idea of it.
Someday we'll see this in the Smithsonian, mark my words. I'd like to go on now to a more sophisticated type, which is represented by this one, and this one is called Mr. Adeline. I gather now that you have used that idea in getting rid of all the knobs that we saw in the first unit.
Well, several years more research has refined and improved the devices, and now we have 3 blocks of plastic. Each block of plastic contains 6 memristor cells. In other words, each block of plastic replaces 6 test tubes.
And each one of those bits of plastic then is, that is, each individual insert is one of these plating, deplating
It's a variable
arrangements.
resistor. And information is stored in these things in terms of the thickness of a plated metallic film.
Would you set up a demonstration for us on that?
Be happy to. Right now the machine is cleared, and let's see if we can adapt this to solve a simple problem like the TJ problem that we saw before on the knobby Adeline.
Yes.
The T we want to be positive, so I'll press this lever to the right. What happens is that every single cell is either plating or deplating, and they do this all simultaneously. This is a J pattern, and I'd like this to give a good negative response. I'll insert a T pattern here, and I'd like this to give a solid positive response. And I'll insert a J pattern here and make this give a negative response. Now let's check back and see how the other responses are doing. Here's a T. It's positive. It's been weakened, but we can reinforce it.
Here.
Here's a J. It's giving a negative response. We can reinforce it a little. Here's a T. It's pretty solid. And there's a J, which we trained most recently. You notice that the response is both solid on things that have been trained in most recently. In order to get it to do the old things with the new, the whole business has to be repeated over and over again, typically, until the whole problem socks in. I think it's socked in now. The T is positive. The J is negative. T is positive. The J is negative.
In other words, Adeline then has retained this that you have put into it. How long will it retain this?
Oh, in principle, indefinitely.
I'd like to go on now and find out.
Practically not.
Find out how you're able to do that with that very small memristor cell, the plating, deplating, or plating. And I gather this is one of those units, and right down here in a very small, compact capsule.
That's it right
is
there.
The unit that makes that possible.
That's the latest commercially available memristor device. It's encapsulated in a transistor can.
Now, we could either plate or deplate by pressing these buttons.
Correct.
Now, which one should we press?
Well, how about pressing the black one, and then
This
you'll
one?
plate.
Now we're,
The meter reading is proportional to the thickness of the plating.
now we're electroplating at that
All right.
point.
Now, if we reverse it, now you'll be plating in the opposite direction.
And the needle swings back
and
again.
the needle swings back again. And you can stop it, and it stops, and you can plate again, and wherever you leave it, it stays. It's perfectly continuous analog storage.
And the way these things are put together, I gather that each one of these very small ones here represents one of these cells, one of these variable cells that you've described.
That is correct.
Each one then has a drop of liquid. There would have to be a plating liquid in there.
That's right.
And a small wire down the bottom so that you could run a battery of these and do all kinds of things with them in
You
place
can
of
very
the...
readily make an Adeline,
Oh,
a very
excellent.
small learning machine.
Say, speaking of that, suppose we took a series of Adeline units and put them together. Then we'd have a different kind of unit.
That's right. We call this sort of thing a Madeline, which stands for many Adelines.
A series of Adelines put together then would become a Madeline. And when I look at this wiring diagram, I guess it is here, I'm totally confused with the complexity of all this.
Well, it may seem complex. Actually, it's quite simple. I find my wife's knitting much more complex.
Oh, really? I can see what you mean.
Absolutely. Now then, we have an array of Adelines connected to a majority rule element. So the final decision is based on a majority vote. We have a way of adapting the system so that the Adelines can help each other solve more complex problems than can be solved with a single Adeline alone. So that's the idea of the Madeline.
And I've been very much interested in some of the work that you've been doing with sound wave recognition, and I gather this is something that is extremely important in our entire story. In fact, it's up there behind us, and I'm also holding a small unit of the same thing. Now, what does this represent?
This represents a model of the spectral energy of the sound intensity in different frequency bands as filtered from the spoken word zero.
So if I were to say zero, actually what I'm saying is represented by all these bumps.
That's right. It looks pretty complex, but that is the form that it has to be placed in order for an Adeline to be able to begin to recognize it.
But this is the beginning, and what does it look like after Adeline gets through with it?
Well, first, before it's fed into the Adeline, it's presented in this form, which is analog. It has to be digitized. Yes. And this gives you something that sort of is reminiscent of Manhattan. You see a bunch of things looking like buildings. This is a quantized version of the analog model that you've shown previously.
You know, I'd like to find out a little bit about some of your experimental work in putting various kinds of words and ideas into Madeline with this voice recognition again. Would you tell us of this?
Well, here we see a program loaded in, and the machine is very nearly trained to recognize spoken words. You'll soon see Mr. Coford speaking to it, and it will recognize what he said.
Spot is a dog.
You can almost feel it thinking, like, if we can use that word to describe it. I don't like to.
See Spot run.
Throw the ball to the dog. Idiot.
Does anybody speak French?
Un, la, rouge, a, courir, est, lance, regarde, est, rouge. Lance la balle rouge.
Mari wa akai.
Well then, Bernie, it doesn't make any difference what kind of a language you use with Adeline or with Madeline. Still, the instrument will be able to recognize this and will be able to actually to print out in English.
That's right. We've trained it in as many as 6 different languages simultaneously. And whatever language you pronounce the words in, it will type out what you said in English.
That is a fantastic thing. You know, you've done some things that have a very practical application, and I refer to the work that you've done in weather forecasting. This is just at the beginning, but I'd like to find out about this.
Well, we've had lots of fun with weather forecasting, actually. We've enjoyed this work together with the weather research group at the San Francisco airport. They've been most helpful in providing us with the data that we needed and advice on how to do this. The basic idea is to take a pressure pattern, take information from pressure patterns, and feed this into an Adeline. Now, if yesterday's pressure pattern is fed into the Adeline, and the Adeline is adapted to read either +1 or -1, that is, either rain or no rain, if you feed in yesterday's pressure pattern and adapt it to read today's weather, and you do this a number of times, then by golly, when you feed in today's pressure pattern, the doggone thing reads tomorrow's weather.
And some of the results you've got on this are really quite interesting. Now, this kind of information we're looking at now is exactly what?
Well, the problem that we've attempted to solve is that of forecasting rain or no rain for the San Francisco Bay Area during the rainy season. And we've gotten 7 years' worth of weather data from the Weather Bureau to adapt on and test to see if it's possible for Adeline to do this. The weights that resulted from such a training experiment are indicative of the significance of the different aspects of the pressure pattern. These are very interesting to the weatherman. The actual results, the final results that were obtained in the series of experiments, and here it was actually trained on something like 50 patterns, 50 pressure patterns. And in this particular experiment where you see the results, and it was tested on about 100 different cases.
Yes.
On the test set, the official forecaster scored 78% for forecasting tonight's weather, 89% for, 89% for tonight, 78% for today, and only 67% correct for tomorrow. Using the best information, that is pressure and time rate of change of pressure, these were both fed to the Adeline. The Adeline scored equally for today and tonight with the weatherman, but for tomorrow, the Adeline scored significantly better, scored 83% versus 67% for the weatherman. Just recently, we've quadrupled the amount of data used in this experiment, and the results are quite accurate. They're essentially the same. So we're now very, very confident.
I can see what Adeline is going to be doing in the future, working with the Weather Bureau and taking over routine work that would otherwise take a great deal of time.
I think this is a good point.
Bernie, many people in mathematical work have used various kinds of games. A lot of them have used chess and other things of this kind, but you've selected a game which goes under the name of 21, over or under, or blackjack. So may I give you this deck of cards?
Thanks. Gee, a jack.
Oh, excellent. Now, why did you select
Blackjack.
this game, and why is it important in your work with computers?
People who are doing work and research in artificial intelligence have on many occasions used games to test the intellectual capabilities, and put intellectual in quotes, of their machines.
Yes.
We are interested in doing it for similar reasons, but we have some special reasons for blackjack. That is, blackjack is a very simple game. There are optimal strategies that have been developed mathematically, and it turns out that the blackjack game is simple because the player plays against the dealer. The Adeline would be the player, would be playing against the dealer, which is really essentially inanimate, although physically he's a human. He follows a strict set of rules and has no real choice over his action. He does just according to the rule book. Now, we see behind us some patterns. This shows how the patterns are formed from the blackjack game. The things that are involved in the decision to be made by the Adeline, the things involved are the dealer's cards showing and the sum of the cards that have been dealt by the Adeline itself to the Adeline. Now, this shows how the patterns are formed in digital form so that the Adeline can understand it.
Well, before we find out about the results of this training program using this card game, you know, the thing that really amazes me is the fact that this little section right here is the thing that makes Adeline able to play blackjack. So using this, let's go into your laboratory and find out what happens now when you start on preliminary training procedure with this equipment.
All right. Here is a scene showing our computer, Madeline 2, which is actually connected together with a digital computer. So we have an adaptive computer connected to a digital computer. You can see a microphone that was used in some of our speech recognition experiments. There is Lee Talbot, a graduate student in electrical engineering, feeding a program into the computer.
Well, now, as a result, then, of this work with Madeline, then Madeline does the sort of thing that you would expect. The game improves over a period of time. So using this blackjack game, as we progress, then Madeline ends up playing a much better game than it was able to do previously.
Behind us, we have a slide showing a learning curve that gives a measure of the rate that Adeline learns, gains competency in playing blackjack versus the number of games played.
I'm way down at the left down there.
That's too bad. But after a while, it learns, and you can see the results.
Mm-hmm. This printout sheet from the equipment gives us a pretty good idea of just what's happened here. There has been a tremendous change, and how many games do we have altogether? I'm going to bring this up here in this position.
In this case, the Adeline and the computer together played 25,000 games.
25,000. How long does that take?
Oh, a few minutes.
Just a few minutes. And the change then, again, is shown in the same percentage curve that we saw a little while ago. That
we began with a rate of about 21% and worked up pretty close to 50%, which is the theoretical optimum.
And then way down at the bottom down here,
way down at the bottom, we can see some strategies. We can compare the Adeline strategy against the theoretical optimum, and they turn out to be, within reason, very similar to each other. This is a complete Adeline on this card. It has 20 weights.
You know, I'd like to go over this next section right now. I just dropped my broomstick, so if you allow me to regain my broomstick, I'd like to go over this next section here and see what luck I have with some balancing of the The broom, the sort of thing that youngsters have done in the past, of course. They do this sort of thing, and they do it much better than I do. But, Bernie, if we can come over here, I would like to look at this piece of equipment, which we have here is something entirely different. It's a broomstick, and this broomstick, however, is a mechanical type and is held in position here on this special rotor base. And all of this is mathematically controlled by that instrument of yours. Madeline, or is it Adeline? Which one?
Well, actually, only an Adeline. That's all it takes. Only an Adeline.
We can see here, of
Here we
course,
see a film in the laboratory of an Adeline controlling the broom balancer. You can see it balancing away.
and it's again all done mathematically as a result of the activity of the unit working on this very piece of equipment which we see here. Bernie, I'd like to ask you, what do you see for the future of this kind of equipment? What may we expect?
Well, I think 10 years from now, the adaptive computer is going to play a significant role in the world as the digital computer plays today. It will be used in a variety of pattern recognition problems, problem solving. It will be used in language translation, information retrieval. It will be used in just a whole flock of applications that we've yet to conceive. As you can see from what we have at the present time, it's quite a versatile concept. We expect it to be a major innovation in data processing.
Well, Dr. Bernard Woodrow, we wish to thank you, sir, for coming to this program to tell us of your work in this field.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Of all those demonstrations, you know, I like the broom the best. Now, don't go away, because we'll be back very, very shortly with the animal of the week. Our animal comes from the high Andes, or did originally. At one time, they were almost extinct. And then in 1923, about 11 animals were brought back to this country. And since that time, there are a great many chinchillas, and I almost lost that one. And Mrs. Watanabe is the woman who knows about these. So, Mrs. Watanabe, I wonder if you'd tell us about them, and I'm going to hand this one to Judy. Judy, will you help us? Show me how. I don't seem to be able to hold these. Would you see? That's it. That's the girl. Tell me a little bit, Mrs. Watanabe, about the rate of growth of these. When are they full grown?
They are full grown when they're 6 months.
And normally, how many litters a year might one expect from
They
them?
litter twice a year, and they litter 2 per litter.
2 per litter.
Mm-hmm. That's the average.
These that we're holding now, the one that Judy has here and the one that I have, these are not quite full grown?
No, they're only 5 months.
Well, now, full maturity then, what, over a year, 18 months or what?
Well, usually about a year, 8 months to a year, and they weigh about 16 ounces in the average. There are some that weighs more.
Very beautiful and very friendly little fellows. And the one thing that's so amazing is the texture of this fur. And when we examine this fur, we can see the reason that furriers have been so interested in this for a good many centuries. In fact, the early people who came into South America many years ago, as you well know, were so intrigued with this that they took chinchilla fur back to Europe in those early days. How many pelts would be required, for example, for a half-length coat of the kind
A
we're
short
seeing right
coat would be about 38, 40
now? 38 to
pelts.
40 pelts. One of the most beautiful of all the coats that furriers have ever worked out.
Oh, yes,
Really,
they're
really
just
a fantastic
lovely.
thing. Well, let me ask you a little bit about this carrying cage we have over here, because this is something I haven't seen before. Each compartment, oh, almost lost that one. Come back here. Here you go. Come back here. Each compartment is just large enough to hold one of these chinchillas. We have one here, and of course there are 2 of them that seem to be asleep down here. This is the normal way for carrying them about when you go to various parts of the country?
Yes, so they won't jump around so much and to lose the fur.
Oh, yes. And how's yours doing there, Judy? May we bring this one up now? That's it. Well, Judy, thank you very much. And Ms. Watanabe, thank you very much for coming
Thank
to the
you.
program to tell us about the chinchilla. We hope you've enjoyed our presentation. We'll look forward to seeing you on our next program. Thank you very much.